Today is March 23rd. My name is Jenna Masahara, and I'll be interviewing Greg Miyanaga for the Coquitlam Heritage Oral History Project. And a reminder that this interview is being recorded and will be made available to the public. So first, I guess, can you tell me what year you were born and describe what your childhood home was like?
I was born in 1963 in Southern Alberta. And when I was in grade 1, 1969, my family moved to Coquitlam because my dad got a transfer. So the whole family packed up and moved to Coquitlam. And we lived in the Miller Park area. It was a nice little house, and it was a brand new neighborhood, brand new development. So all the houses were new, and people were just getting used to each other because there was no established neighborhood there before. So we kind of built this small community on Stanton Avenue where I lived.
And did you have siblings that lived with you?
Yeah, I have a sister. She lived with us, and she lives 4 minutes away now. And there was no other, no extended family. In fact, we left all of our extended family in Southern Alberta, where they all lived. I had an aunt who lived in Coquitlam, kind of set the trail before us, but she lived in kind of central Coquitlam.
And you mentioned that you were the only Japanese kid in school growing up. How was that experience?
It was I don't really know any different, but it was a different experience because I was the only Japanese kid in my class, and my only other Japanese kid in my school is my sister. And in fact, I didn't know of any other Japanese kids in Coquitlam until later. And as far as diversity, I think there was a couple of Chinese kids, and both of them owned the local stores. There were no black kids, that's for sure, and no other Asian kids, and there were a couple of European kids that were newish, but it was very predominantly a white neighborhood.
So your schooling, what would you say, do you remember what sort of the curriculums that you were taught?
Oh yeah, it's similar and different today. It was very, very much reading, writing, and math, and some social studies and science. It's very similar, except there's more about wellness, and we talk more about issues rather than facts, and try a lot of memorization. So it was very similar, but it was very much rote though as well. It's a lot of memory, whereas instead of comprehension or going through issues.
And growing up, did you do extracurricular activities?
I did, because I was so small though, and I didn't do a lot of team sports because I was kind of small and I was kind of weak. And so I did a lot of individual things. I did judo and I did skiing. My dad was really into fishing and water skiing, so we'd take the boat on the weekends. We go water skiing. I was also kind of musical, so I played piano for a bit, and then I switched to guitar, and I'm still playing guitar now.
Did you do any competitions for your guitar?
Oh no, nothing. I didn't do anything terribly competitive, but I still enjoyed it as a hobby.
And so, I guess you mentioned you went fishing with your family. Did you have any fond memories of or memories that stick out to you about that?
Oh yeah, we'd go to Cultus Lake, and we'd water ski there on the weekends and have barbecues with our friends, and it was a good time. We'd ski, and we'd swim, and we'd have these barbecues, and all our friends would be there. And my dad was also musical, so he'd bring out the guitar and we'd sing around the campfires. It was pretty fun. And then some summers in the mid-'70s, we'd go to Christina Lake, and we'd go to these little cabins, and we'd spend a couple of weeks there. We'd kind of camp and ski, but it was really funny because last year, or a couple of years ago, I guess, I went on the internment bus tour, and I found out that the cabins we stayed in were actually used for internment. And I don't think my dad knew that. I don't know if he would have stayed there if he'd known that these water skiing cabins that we'd stay at were actually used for internment.
Wow. So do you, So talking about the internment, do you know uh, when did your family arrive in Canada? Were they?
Yeah, my family, both sides, my mother's side and my dad's side, arrived kind of around 1920. And my mom's side, my grandfather came to, I found out he came to work on the railroad. And then he got into some coal mining, and then he eventually ended up being a farmer in southern Alberta. And my dad's family, my grandfather came out kind of as a late teenager. I think he lied about his age. And he came over, and he was working forestry. And eventually he got enough money to buy this little place out in Maple Ridge. And he had this farm, and he was also working on this lumber company. And he sent back for my grandmother and brought her over here. And then my dad was born. And then during when in the 1940s, that's when they lost everything. And they actually got moved from kind of the Maple Ridge mission area to southern Alberta. And the ironic thing about that is if internment hadn't happened, and the forced removal hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have been born, because that's how my parents met, was because my father's family has moved to Alberta and my mother's family was already there.
Oh wow! So so I'm like, so you said like you didn't know about this history yourself growing up. So what was that like process like discovering it when you were doing your research?
Yeah, it's funny because my grandparents, my grandfather, he'd mentioned once in a while, just saying, it was hard back then. And my aunt said my grandfather just felt it was something he had to do as a Canadian for the war, give everything up. So he didn't feel that bitter about it. He just said it was hard and didn't talk about that much. And my dad didn't remember it that much because he was I think he was 5 when he was moved. And so I didn't actually know that much about it. And I didn't learn anything about it in school. And then I got involved in this project in around the year 2000. My friend Pat Tanaka was working on this project. She says, yeah, I'm working on this project about the internment, and I don't think you know anything about it, but you might be handy because I think you might be able to do the desktop publishing. And back then, I think I knew how to use a word processor, so I think they thought I might be useful for that. And so I found out that Pat's friend, Mas Fukawa, had been working on this project where she got some funding from the government to work on internment lessons for high school. And so this team, including this guy named Rick Beardsley and my friend Mike Perry Whittingham and a bunch of others, were working on this high school resource. And Mas Fukawa said, we should probably do this for elementary as well. So I'll ask my friend Pat and see if she can get some people to write some lessons. And as I was listening to them talk about these lessons, I said, I've got some ideas for this. And finally they just said, hey, just go write this. And so I put together these lessons, and it turned out pretty well. But I learned a lot from Mass. Mass really educated me on things I really didn't know about, like internment and how about people being taken to Hastings Park and being housed there temporarily until they were shipped out to the Rockies, or to being forced moved to Alberta or beyond. So I learned so many things, and I didn't know that at the end of the war that Japanese Canadians were given the choice of not returning their homes, but being moved past the Rockies or being repatriated back to Japan. And a lot of these people had never been to Japan, so it was a very bad deal. It was a bad choice. But I had a great time working on the lessons because Mass had this great set of resources, and so she taught me about it, and she loaned me these books, and I got to learn a whole lot. And so we put together these really interactive lessons. And these lessons eventually won the Governor General's Award for teaching Canadian history in, I think, 2006.
So like, did you go to like Ottawa to receive the award?
Yeah, I did. There was this big ceremony, and myself and 6 other people won it for various things, and it was got to meet the Governor General, and they had this big dinner. Really got treated like royalty. And Michael Jean, who was the Governor General at the time, really took a lot of interest in the different projects we've done. And so it was very eye-opening to meet people that had done these amazing lessons and studies about Canadian history.
So like that started your now your current research on landscapes of injustice.
That's right.
So
yeah, that was my kind of first working with kind of a big curricular project in social studies, which ironically was one of my worst subjects in school, was social studies. I didn't really get it. I didn't like the just memorizing facts and dates. I didn't see how it applied to me. And so I really didn't like, I thought that the teachers were great because they really loved their stuff, but I didn't really like the way it was being taught because I didn't care. And then learning about this history was pretty fantastic. And then the Landscapes Project, it's this massive project centered through the University of Victoria. It includes like UBC and Simon Fraser and Ryerson and the National Nikkei Museum and the Pier 41 Museum in Halifax. And so it's this, 7-year project that's worth that was funded $2.5 million through SSHRC. And again, Mass was the chair for the educational resources. And so she asked Mike Perry Whittingham to write the high school resources and myself to write the elementary resources. And instead of focusing on the internment, it focused mostly on the dispossession, where Japanese Canadians lost their property, because I guess that's an unusual thing that's never happened anywhere else in the world, where people have been interned, but they've never had their properties basically seized and their possessions sold from without their permission.
so like what's like you would say the like what's like the biggest learning thing that you've gotten from learning on this project?
Do you mind if I talk a bit about what it looks like for the
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I'm just going to grab a couple things. We'll be right back. This is where the editing comes in. Okay, so the way the elementary lessons work for Landscapes of Injustice is I took all of the, well, not all of them, but I took a lot of the resources that the research teams had done. There's some property records teams, and there's a legal team, and there's a GIS mapping team, and they had these incredible resources, and I didn't really know what to do with them. And so I came up with this idea of coming up with a simulated community of Japanese Canadians. And so each student is given a property card that kind of looks like this. And on it has a picture of the property back then, and if possible, what it looks like now. It's got the address of the property. It's got the name of the property owners and the kind of business that was there. So for this one, this is the 314 Powell Street, and it was owned by the Fuji family, and they had a chop suey restaurant. And so this is using the Landscapes of Justice research, and the kids adopt a family and a business that looks like that. And then they create a simulation of that. And so they make these buildings based on the actual properties with, this is the outside, here's the residence up above and the business down below. And then when you open it up, they have these simulations of the inside of the property. And so here's what the residence look like and the business down below. And these people and possessions can be moved off, and they're just kind of sticky tacked on there. And then based on the map that we've given the teachers, they post these on a big bulletin board in their classroom, and they recreate the 300 block of Powell Street, and they have this kind of simulated community, and they learn a bit about what happened to like with life there, but they're not told that in December 7th, Pearl Harbor happens, and then when the students come back in the next day, their buildings are still there on the bulletin board, but on a different bulletin board, there is an internment bulletin board, and all of their characters, their avatars, are moved onto the internment bulletin board, and they, we unpack this through government records and through photos that have been archived from the landscapes team, and they learn about why this happened and how this happened. And as they're in internment, little by little, their possessions from their residences and from their businesses slowly start to disappear, and that's where we start to unpack the dispossession part of it, and they learn how the government sold their possessions, and how Japanese Canadians reacted to this through actual letters of protest that Japanese Canadians had written back then. And so it's this whole process of kind of moving through internment and dispossession, and then eventually ending up with redress in the 1980s.
So what are like the reactions that children get when they do this project?
I think they're mostly shocked that, because they think of Canada as a fair, multicultural place. But, times were different back then, and, Canada had some growing to do as a country. We didn't have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is one of the lessons that we have. Explain how if we had had the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, this may or may not have happened, because there are rights that protect people's property and their protection against illegal seizure. And so they're pretty surprised. The students are very surprised. And when I did this earlier on, their parents were also surprised. They'd not learned about this in school. So it was an education for not just the students, but their families as well.
Yeah, so like same for like you, like even in like high school and stuff, like you, like it was when you like Mass approached you, was that like the first time you sort of heard it, or did you know?
I kind of heard about it, and I think it was like there was one sentence that one of my history teachers mentioned when I was in high school, but there was really no curriculum built on it now, built on it back then. There it is actually in some curricular areas in social studies and history now for grade 5 and grade 8, and also in high school as well now, because it talks about human rights. How about you? Did you learn about it?
Yeah, not really in school. Like I did know about it. It was actually funny because like I learned it from I read an Eric Walters book about it in like grade 3, I think. And I was kind of like, oh, I know my grandfather was like in Canada during that time. I was like wondering if he went through this, and then like learning through my family history, that sort of way. But yeah.
Whenever I start my presentations, I ask my audience how many people learn about school, and rarely do people put up their hands. In fact, I did a presentation at Mackin House, and nobody put up their hands from that group. It's quite interesting. And then when I was in Ottawa for a conference, I ran into somebody who was also Japanese Canadian, who learned about her family's internment only because she'd been looking through her textbook and saw a picture of her father. And so, it's just this cultural phenomenon where Japanese Canadians do not talk about internment. So the history almost got lost because of it.
Do you have an idea of why that is?
For my family, I think it was, there's a language barrier. My own father's memory was pretty dim about it. And I found out through Mass that a lot of families just did not pass on that shame of being the enemy or having their property stolen. And it's also kind of a cultural norm not to pass on anger to next generations.
Yeah. But aside from like, well, do you speak Japanese? Sorry.
Pardon me?
Do you speak
Sorry, you
Japanese?
cut out there for a bit.
Oh, do you speak
What do I
Japanese?
speak Japanese? I do not. Very, very little. My daughter does. She's actually taken up the mantle for speaking Japanese, and she's really interested in Japanese culture and Japanese history.
But so then like I know like I guess like the history wasn't so much passed down through you, but like did you have like artifacts or family heirlooms that your family passed down to you and on?
Not really. It's funny because on both sides, and I don't know if this is because of the internment, but I thought that when I go visit my grandparents on both sides, I thought they were kind of almost hoarders because they had so much stuff. Like my grandparents on my father's side lived on a farm, and they just had stuff packed into every shelf. And my grandmother, who lived alone in this house, just had stores and stores of like dried beans and pasta in this big pantry she had. And like she's just one person, but she had like enough food for like lots and lots of families, I thought. And then I remember once we went water skiing, and we had to go back because my grandmother had lost her cash. I guess she used to keep large amounts of cash on her, and so they used to keep lots of things. So, but going back to your question about family heirlooms, no, I don't have a lot. I have some pictures of my grandparents. I asked for a teapot when my grandmother passed away, just so I could remember. So I have that. But in terms of family heirlooms, no, I don't.
Well, I mean, there's immigration, I guess, like what about like celebrations and or those sort of things like Christmas or birthdays, like are uh,
Christmas and birthdays were just kind of normal. We'd have like parties or we'd go out for dinner. The one celebration that really sticks in my mind that might be different would be New Year's Day. We'd have a massive New Year's Day party, and we'd invite all of our friends and all of our coworkers. And so in this little house, we'd have 80 people that would drop by throughout the day. And my mom would be cooking for like a week, making like sushi, and my dad would barbecue big salmon because he was a big fisherman. And so our house would be just packed. And it was a really fun time. And I get to see my relatives that I hadn't seen in a long time. And my dad's coworkers had kids my age. And so I get to see them. And so it was really, really fun. And I think that might have been a lot of people's first exposure to Japanese food as well. And my mom's a really good cook. And so my friends would come over and just raid our fridge because they really enjoyed her food. And I think she introduced a lot of those kids that were my age to Japanese food.
did you so was your aside from New Year's, did you was your dinners like more typically like Japanese food, or was it like a mix?
It was a mix. I think maybe once or twice a week we'd have Japanese food, but otherwise it'd be these kind of normal meals or some very unusual meals, because my mom would try some different things sometimes because she was really into cooking and still is. And so we'd have some very different kinds of things that we'd never seen before. Yeah, but otherwise it was pretty typical.
Did you eat together as a family, or was it
Yep, every day. Like my dad would go on business trips once in a while, but usually we'd just kind of huddle around our little kitchen table. And a lot of times I'd have my friends over and they'd be there with us eating food. But every day we'd have family dinner. And that's pretty important.
just for your own curiosity, did you celebrate like Boys' Day or Girls' Day?
Never. I didn't know that existed until I think there was this in grade 6. One of the other, we studied different countries, and somebody mentioned that there's Boys' Day and Girls' Day in Japan. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah. As going back to your because you're a teacher, so like what inspired you to become a teacher?
It's really funny. I did not want to be a teacher growing up. My mother was a teacher, and my aunt was a teacher, and I have some uncles and aunts that are teachers. And I thought, man, that looks like a horrible job. You know, you work really hard, and you have to be around kids all day, and it just did not seem appealing whatsoever. And then going through, school, I was pretty good at math and science, and so I thought I'd become like an engineer like my dad. And then I went to university, and I realized I really don't like math and sciences. If I have to do this for the rest of my life, I don't think it's going to happen. And I ended up taking my degree in English literature. And to get my degree, I needed one more class, and I thought I'd like to take a children's literature. And the English department's children's literature course was full, so they allowed me to take the education children's lit. And I really liked it. I thought it was really fun. And at the end, we had to have an exit interview. And the professor says, you know, you'd be a really good teacher. It's kind of hard to get into the teaching program here at SFU. But I bet if I wrote a letter of recommendation, you could probably get in. And so he did. And I have to look back. I really enjoyed my life teaching. And it's actually a really good job for me because I'm interested in different things and I get to be creative, and it's different every day. So it worked out really well.
Like, well, I guess, did you like always gear towards teaching? Like when you decided to become a teacher, did you gear towards teaching for like the primary students?
No, I really like kids. Kids are just awesome because they're enthusiastic and they're curious, and they're kind of goofy. And I think I'm all those things as well. But I thought I was going to teach high school English. And then when I got in my practicum, I went into elementary just because I thought it might be fun. And it turned out to be really fun. And so I've taught different things. I've taught as low as like grade 2, and I've taught middle school, but right now I'm teaching grade 2 and grade 3, and it's kind of the sweet spot for me. The kids are really nice and they're very creative, and it's just really enjoyable.
And how is it different teaching in COVID?
How much time do you have? It's really different. It was a real struggle last year going into COVID and trying to teach remotely. And then we, in the Coquitlam school district, we came back in June, and some kids were allowed to come back and some kids still stayed at home. And then I was exhausted in July just because that was like trying to do 2 full-time jobs, because we were teaching both at home and then we go into school and we teach there. So it was really hard. And so I spent the month of July just kind of recovering from that. And then when we came back in September, it was like trying to herd cats, because we had to teach kids to stay away from each other and to wash their hands. And it was easier in June because there's only maybe 4 or 5 kids in my class. And now there's like 21, 22, and you got to teach them to stay away from each other, and you got to, stay in your desk at all times. And so my style of teaching is very interactive. It's got a lot of movement. It's got a lot of choice. And then going into COVID, you have to teach with, stay in your desks, don't touch each other, don't talk to each other if you're not wearing a mask. So it was really hard. There's no choice. Everybody does the same thing, same way. And so, but it's getting better as I get used to protocols and the students get used to it. And so we're still learning a lot, but it is very different.
And I'm assuming like you teach your own like the landscapes and justice classes like with your students.
I do not. Yeah, that's the funny part, because the landscapes and justice lessons are really built for the intermediate grades, anywhere like grade 4 to grade 8. Okay. But I teach grade 2 and grade 3. I teach some certain principles, but I try not to teach too much, because some of the teachers in my school actually do teach the landscape stuff. So I don't want to steal their thunder. But it's true, I don't teach my landscapes things to my grade 2s and grade 3s.
Do you like talk to like the teachers who do teach it? Like, do they come to you for like discussing the lessons?
Oh yeah. Sometimes yeah, and so we talk a lot about it when they're teaching it, and they're excellent. Like they take things in ways I never thought of taking them. We fine tune some things. Before COVID, sometimes I would come into the classes and actually teach a couple of lessons with them or for them, just so they could see. Some of these lessons are also tricky to maneuver, so it was good for them to see uh, how I might uh, implement some of these lessons. Okay, I I've got it frozen here. Oh, are you back? Because you're, I think we were frozen there for a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know that would be technical difficulties, of course. um, and you mentioned that you have a daughter, right?
Yes.
Do you like how was that? Have you discussed your family history with her?
Yeah, we've discussed it quite a bit. She, yeah, she's in her third year at San Fraser University, and yeah, we talk about her family history quite a lot, especially seeing as you know, she was taking a lot of history courses, and I was developing these lessons and getting pretty involved with landscapes of justice, going to meetings and giving presentations and things. So I talked about that, and she was always really interested because she's a she's a she's like a sponge. She tends to absorb things quite a bit, and she loves her heritage. My wife is not Japanese, and she grew up in Steveston, and so she actually had more exposure to Japanese kids than I did because of where she went to school. And so we have lots of discussions about uh, how our family histories have played out in our lives.
Did you like when you went to like high school did you like get in contact with like more like Japanese Canadians, or is it still like sort of you were like the only one besides your sister?
I wasn't the only one, but I didn't actually have that much to do with other Japanese Canadians. Apart from my family, in grade 8, I guess I was able to meet like 2 more Japanese Canadians that went to my high school. But we had different sets of friends, and I didn't have, apart from judo, um, I didn't have a lot of Japanese Canadian or Japanese interests, or opportunities to meet other Japanese Canadians. And I think that might be because I find even going, when I go across Canada, I find that the Japanese Canadian community is pretty fractured. Like there's not a lot of interaction. In fact, when I was in Ottawa and I was at the National uh, Association of Japanese Canadians, they had one of their meetings. They were actually jealous of me because they thought that we had a really strong Japanese Canadian community in Vancouver. And I thought, I guess so. The only thing I can point to with that would be the National Nikkei Museum and the Nikkei Center, and also the Powell Street Festival, both of which I go to quite often now. But uh, back in high school, back in even my college days, I didn't have a lot to do with other Japanese Canadians.
So like as you mentioned, you nowadays go to like the Powell Street Festival.
Yes.
Like, do you remember like your first time going to it? What that's been like?
My first time, I no, I don't remember the first time, but I remember going later as kind of an adult and having a really great time because of the food. The food was fantastic, and watching the sumo wrestling guys, and buying a bunch of crafts and things, and getting the noodles and the salmon. Yeah, and I'd bring my friends, and they thought it was just the greatest, because I think mostly because of the food.
What's some of your favorite Japanese or dishes?
I really like chirashi because I just like a different mixture of fish and rice, and it's very fast because you can eat it so fast. My grandma used to make this really great mochi, which I still wish I got the recipe too. And of course, I love udon. I tried to make it myself as well, but not as well as my grandma.
So you've learned how to cook these dishes yourself then?
Yeah, I try it. They're kind of weak facsimiles of recipes I've learned from my mom or my grandparents or from YouTube. Yeah.
Um, um, was there sort of like any like world events that had a big impact on you growing up?
Uh, I was thinking about that, and the only one I can really point to in retrospect was redress. Um, I think that's when I finally, my grandparents had talked about being moved from Mission and losing their stuff, and I didn't really think it was a Canadian or world issue until redress. And I thought, okay, so the government is apologizing for this, so it must have been as bad as my grandparents made it out to be, or my thought of that, because if they're going to basically apologize and offer uh, this acknowledgement to Japanese Canadians and to give each surviving Japanese Canadian this money, it must have been pretty, must have been a big deal, like as big as I thought it might be. But because it didn't affect other people, I thought maybe it wasn't as important as I thought. So this acknowledgement was impactful. And also, it's really funny because my parents use the redress money to further our education. They spend on our university. And my grandmother, who's still alive at the time, bought herself a great big satellite dish so she could watch wrestling on TV. And she could watch it anytime she wanted. I thought that's pretty great.
Um, I think I read some of that you from your family, you saw that you're in your history, you had a court case that they try to get back some money.
Right. Yeah, through Landscapes of Injustice, the manager of the project, his name is Mike Abe. He has this incredible project where he's able to find the case files of Japanese Canadians who made a claim to the government for compensation back in the 1940s and 1950s, so when they made these claims. And I found he was able to find my grandfather's claim. And it was really interesting, the things he claimed, because he was very fastidious about making sure everything was written down. And the court case was interesting because my grandfather had rounded down just to make things easier for the accounting, and the court was just berating for this. Like, they were going, well, why would you do such things? It makes it not accurate. We don't believe you then. And they were kind of going on about this, and I think it was just so that it was easier for them to account for things, but they saw it as like an omission of data. So I found that very unusual and kind of unsettling.
Yeah, my family also has a similar court case too. Yeah, they try to say like the land that they lost was like worth more than what the government said. And yeah, unfortunately, same, like there's a similar thing that like.
Where was your family?
They lived in like the Stevenson area sort of, and they owned like a little supermarket sort of thing. So, yeah.
And where did they end up?
They went all. They did end up in like Ontario area. I don't exactly know the name of the
camp. Oh, it's okay.
So,
wow, that's pretty far.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've so but like I like there's like I keep like any information to get my family is like very like little pieces. Like I just recently learned that my grandfather went to like he went back, or my great grandfather, he went to school in like South Korea.
Oh,
And my dad was like, oh, like you didn't know that? And I was like, how do I know that? But yeah. Anyways, I guess sort of kind of already answered this, but like what are some like big changes that you have implemented with your own family in terms of traditions or celebrations that you take part in?
for my own family, I don't know if I've changed things that much from when I was growing up. We still have, before COVID, birthday parties and celebrations and things. My wife's family has a place up in Powell River, so my daughter loves going up there. So it's good to have that family time. But nothing too unusual. Like we spend a lot of time together, and we, especially with COVID, and we're all musical, and so we played music all the time, and we like to play board games and things, and just sometimes watch Netflix and just chill. So it's just kind of almost the same as when I was a kid, really.
Kind of like similarities. Like what we say, like between you growing up and like your daughter growing up, or like some of like things that you say are like similar, and what are like things that are like different?
One of the biggest things I have to say is, well, technology, but just growing up around here, the diversity is massive. Like as I mentioned, I was the only Japanese kid in my school, and maybe like a handful of Asian or even non-white kids. Whereas, my daughter went to Pine Tree, where it's so multicultural. It's pretty awesome to see the mixture of cultures. I remember it was one school I was teaching at in Port Coquitlam. With the exception of Antarctica, I had representation from every continent, and it was just interesting how this little microcosm of society was playing out. Just the kids did not care about race; they just thought it was part of each kid's personality, each kid's makeup, and it was pretty great. And I think that same thing. Race is not a big deal for the kids that grew up with my daughter. Like they're just kids of different races. I think Polish kids and Korean kids, and Chinese kids, and Caucasian kids. And so there's all sorts of different kinds of cultures that grew up together. That's pretty great.
Did you ever like, because you were sort of like on like, did you ever feel like othered like growing up?
Oh yeah, I definitely felt different. I think I was always, because I was small and because I looked different, and I always felt different, and I was never really bullied, or I don't think that race was ever an issue in terms of how whether the kids were nice to me or not nice to me. I think it was just because I was just a different kid, and I felt different. And so I think because I was small and because I was different, I tended to try to fit in as much as possible, or maybe even blend in the background a bit more. And I tend to use humor a lot as a kind of really a social lubricant, just kind of fit in a little bit better. And so I think people like me because I was funny and because I was pretty smart, but I tended just to be kind of I don't know, just not. I just tried to fit in as best I could, I think.
Um, I guess we're um for what sort of like going back to like landscapes and justice and also your previous lesson plans for like the general public, what sort of like the key ideas that you would want them to understand from your lesson?
Yeah, the key ideas of the previous lessons and landscapes of justice would be kind of these big ideas of what is fair, how do we treat people, uh, what is the difference between belonging and belongings, and so we try and teach kids about the concept of what fair is, and sometimes fair is not the same for everybody. We also try and talk about how you apologize if you've made a mistake and what that looks like in terms of um, individuals, or in the case of internment and dispossession, governments, what that looks like. And it's an interesting parallel with some of the restitutions going on right now with indigenous people, and so the kids can see those parallels as well.
And did you ever have any like sort of pushback against any of these lessons?
No, we have not. Some of the parents were surprised, but they were not saying, don't teach this, or that never happened. No, I think when people are given the facts, I think that they acknowledge that this happened and it was an issue. And also the kids become very emotionally involved in the issue, and so they become very passionate about defending that issue. So it's sometimes very hard to argue with a 9-year-old because they're so passionate about it.
Totally. And I guess, do you have any advice for up and coming teachers or hope teachers?
Yeah, and if I was to give some advice, I'd say to basically enjoy what you do, and try and learn as much as you can in the early part of your teaching to get lots of different skills, but to make your style your own, because you teach who you are, and teaching is such a personal thing, and the more you can put yourself into your teaching, the more genuine it is, and kids will really respond to that, because kids can sense genuineness.
All right. So did you have like what sort of jobs did you have before you were a teacher?
Oh, I had all sorts of jobs. I worked as a fish hatchery worker for a year, and I sold vacuum cleaners for a bit. I worked on the Miyanaga farms in Tabor a couple of summers, where I would sort potatoes from rocks, and I was really bad at it because I was so slow. And I also worked in a lot of restaurants. I worked for like 11 years as a busboy and as a waiter at some different restaurants.
I think, yeah, I think that's like majority all the questions I have. Did you have any thing that you wanted to add, or?
Just that because this is about Coquitlam heritage, I just think that Coquitlam's a really great place to live and to grow up. I'm really a suburban kind of guy. I spent a lot of time in Vancouver in the city when I was a waiter, and so I liked it, but I didn't want to live there. And then when I worked on the fish hatchery, that was really in the woods, and I was like the only person for like 5 miles. And so I found that Coquitlam as a community is a really great place to be, because you've got the services and of a kind of a big city, but you've also got the space and the beautiful nature of the country. So it's this kind of blend of a perfect community.
And you saw, so you mentioned that like it wasn't really developed when you first arrived here, so you've kind of seen how it's like grown throughout the years.
Oh yeah, it's really changed. Like I remember when Coquitlam Center was built, there used to be water slides just behind it. And then when I moved down here into one of my first apartments, uh, Guilford Road was just one lane and one way. So it's really changed. And I think there's like Westwood Track just over here by where I live. And yeah, things have changed so much. I remember driving through to Port Coquitlam with my dad once and thinking, man, where are we going? It seems like the wilderness. And now it's like just down the road.
All right. I think that's everything. Yeah, thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure. It's been very interesting.